everyone. Welcome to this presentation, Awaking the Element FX Simulation Deep Under the Mountain and Above. My name is Fabian Novak. I'm the head of FX at the Yard VFX. And well, let's go. Before that, I spent a few years, I would say almost a decade in London, working on some big blockbuster movies in some very famous VFX studios. And then a few years ago, I moved back to France and started a new exciting adventure at the Yard. So just a few words about the Yard. We are an independent VFX studio based in Paris and Montpellier in France, and recently we opened an office in London. The studio was created by Lawrence Herman in 2014. We are delivering high-quality visual effects services for feature films and episodics. And currently we are, I say 80 employees here, but the number keeps cranking up, so this is not up to date anymore. We are more around 120 people, something like that, and it's going to keep growing up. Here are some of the recent shows we did at the Yard, and today we are going to focus on the Rings of Power Season 2. So first, I am very pleased to show you our fresh new FX Studio reel. That way you will get an idea of what we are doing at the Yard in my department. So is there any best way to start the year 2025 than winning a few awards? So we won 2 Genie Awards in February for Best VFX and Best FX Simulation. And then 2 weeks ago, the Rings of Power Season 2 won a BAFTA for Best VFX. So hell yeah. So what we'll dive in today, this is the menu. So art-directed destruction, various type of effects, water simulation, and the last part will be girl threat. Due to the time limitation of that presentation, I will go rather quickly through the first 3 chapters, also to make Chris happy. And we'll try to keep more time for the last part, which is definitely the most exciting part. So this will be a complete overview, then a deep dive into more technical details of the making of Yard VFX. So please fasten your belt. We're going for an intense ride. I'm going to speak fast and try to go through everything. All right, let's go deep under the mountain and above. So here are a few numbers just to illustrate what we've been through. I'm not going to read them out loud, all of them, but just so you know, we were like 7 in the FX department at the peak of the production, and over the course of 18 months, we published a bit more than 1,600 FX internal versions to be reviewed by our VFX supervisor. A bit of color graphic this time. Not going to read all the number neither, but you will notice that the FX data in red, so especially in the bottom camembert, they are like about a quarter of the total amount of data of all type combined. So yeah, better to be careful with all the heavy FX caches. We actually had some cleanup session every other week to remove the unused and unnecessary BGO sequences in order to avoid to fill up all the drives of the studio, and to try to keep Alexis, our CTO, happy and smiling, which is quite important. So hard-directed destruction. We had to create a bunch of destruction shots, loads of small one and a few larger scale one. Since every single destruction shot were heavily hard-directed in order to fulfill the creative visions, our approach was quite similar for all shots. We built our setup in a way that allowed us to easily control each element, layer, or timing, or event, leaving pretty much zero place for chance, or zero chance for lucky simulation, let's say. So for this solar vent collapsing, for example, we keyframed all the release of the big rocks, crumbling from the ceiling of the vent, which would occlude the light passing through, and it has to be like, specific timing and everything. We added some volumetric simulation to emulate the air trapped inside, being compressed and then blowing out of the vent, spitting out dust and debris of all size. We used particles animated along curves to drive some volume against the wall. We keyframed the constraint of the 4 big pillars, used some custom impulse of velocity to make them move the way we wanted. Added some extra element of dust there and there, and carefully keyframed everything as well to enhance the sense of massive weight and pressure coming from above. And all these events were meticulously timed and choreographed to tell the story of the shot. So plenty of small destruction shot as well, but even the easiest one went through quite a few iterations. So big rock falling in the crowded market, tearing apart some fabrics, making dust at the ground impact, to enhance the practical effects of that was made on set. So there is one thing I don't like much on that shot on the left side, is the yellow stuff coming. Well, that was practical, so I could not do anything about it, sorry. For instance, the dust had to dissipate fast enough so it doesn't cover too much of the performance of the actor, but not too fast so it still looks natural. For all the shots with the dwarves eating the rocks with their pickaxe, we made a setup of RBD plus particles plus volume, very versatile, with a lot of post-simulation controls. So that would allow us to make quick turnarounds and easily address the usual type of creative knots. Please remove 57% of the debris, or can I have just 2% of the large one and 98% of small one? Could you remove that particular debris here at the frame 1046? Or could you avoid to shoot any debris toward the king's face, please? This kind of stuff. This big shot, we had a colossal tower starting to collapse, an enormous rock falling from very high and at very high speed, crashing into a busy bridge. So we keyframed the falling rock until a certain frame, then switched to RBD simulation. That would give us control on the exact speed and timing of the impact. We made some custom fracture system to respect the architectural structure of the bridge to get some nice cracks running along the deck. We keyframed the whole network of constraints to release chunks of the bridge precisely where and when we wanted them to collapse. We added some extra debris flying out of the impact, divided into many layers for more macro control. Many layers of dust with different type of behavior, dissipation, speed, etc. And we did some crowd simulation for the dwarfs, running for their life, along with vellum simulation for the hair, the beard, the clothes, and so on. and some of them switching to ragdoll simulation as well, and flying off the bridge, then falling into oblivion. All these different layers of simulation were under the scrutiny of our VFX supervisor that is sitting right in front of me, so just being careful to what I say. And we ended up precisely art-directed everything to focus the action and make the final version more intense and more dramatic. Beside the destruction shot, we had to create a large panel of different type of effects to give life to all the environment of Khazam-dûm. So we went from a vellum simulation for either for vegetation, clothes, so our dwarfs were not running around naked, basically. Ear, hair, beard. We did some procedural modeling, such as this, which is not really effects, but still. RBD simulation, fire and smoke, hundreds of variations of torches, brazier, to eliminate all the very large caves and environments. And some shots being very long, so that was involving very long caches as well. So crowd simulation using custom crowd system, atmospheric, mist, dust, a sonic wave that was blowing out ton of dust, torches, brazier, blowing out debris as well, and even advecting the waterfall, as you can see here. And all of this in a, this shot was like 480 frame long or something. So again, dealing with very long, heavy caches, and therefore memory footprint optimization was at work here constantly. To give you an idea, this is how the crowd setup looks for that shot. This shot was 360 frames long. So plenty of custom animation, variation for the crowd agents, dwarf using their pickaxe in the mine, carrying wheelbarrows, following narrow paths on the bridges, climbing up and down some stairs, and so on. So plenty of variations, everything manually customed, plenty of torches and brazier, atmos, particles of all sorts. Loads of everything, all crafted by hands with loads of care and love, obviously. And also, as you can see, a long river and some waterfalls, which bring me to water simulation. So we had to create dozens of waterfalls of all sizes to give life to the caves of Khazam-dûm. We also had some rivers and even some magical water cinematics. So with the previews, we knew that most of the waterfalls would be seen from below, which is super cool because we could easily hide the emission source, basically, so that makes the job easier. But for some of them, it would be long shots, and sometimes hundreds and hundreds of frames, seen rather from above, with a river turning into waterfall, so we would have to build a setup accordingly to that constraint. So split the river from the waterfall, to me, was the correct approach. As usual, I always try to keep in mind a very wise principle, which is divide and conquer. So one sim for the top river, one sim for the waterfall, and if there is more waterfall below, then another sim for the mid pool, another sim for the next waterfall, and so on. And obviously, same goes for the additional layers, spray, mist, and whatnot. As usual, we always watch some real-life references when we are making our effect. However, in this particular case, we also had a serious constraint. The look of the waterfalls was already established in season 1 and by some amazing FX artists from a legendary VFX studio. So we had no other choice than to stick to it, basically, to match it. So we used a few key shots from season 1 and started some R&D to try to get as close as possible to these reference shots, focusing on scale, level of detail, and trying to match the speed, the sense of scale, weight, mass, etc. Also started working on some airfield system to get the water to behave correctly when free-falling from large height. I tried a lot of different methods, but eventually I went for my favorite method, which is not an actual airfield at all, but it looks like it. And when it sets correctly, it gives exactly what we are looking for. Big chunks of water being atomized mid-air at a certain speed. So the spray was some pop particles emitted from a flip simulation using a certain range of speed and vorticity as a mask and advected by a volume simulation, also emitted from that same mask. The mist was actually the same volume simulation, simply remapped appropriately. So that's 2 birds, 1 stone. And the foam was a simple pop custom solver with advection from the flip simulation below. And once the setup was ready and functional, we could use it into shots. So here is this 360 frame long shot. So 2 waterfall, 1 mid pool, and the river on the top. So that's pretty much the exact situation we built the setup for. The big advantage of working this way is that when you get some artistic notes, such as can you make the splash on the bridge less splashy around the bridge, then you can just walk on the bottom waterfall and you don't have to re-simulate the whole river and the top waterfall. And so that's pretty efficient. Yeah, I'm gonna skip this one. It was really like just a life of a shot, but that was a quick example. We did some water cymatics. So we made the cymatics in the opening credits of the Rings of Power season 1 and 2. So visually it was something already familiar. And we had some reference, obviously, on the right screen. You see some super cool music clip where the guys did a bunch of fun experiments with music vibration on different types of materials. So those were essentially our main inspiration. So the good cymatics, we created some good cymatics which represents the vibration of the voice of the Princess Disa, like a magic sonar, to localize the orb. And we tried many different things, started from very much scientific sort of based approach, like animating Chladni pattern. I really struggle to say that name loud. To drive some ripple simulation on top of a water surface, basically, and try to control that through some spreading solver to make it progress in a certain direction, adjusting the amplitude and the frequency to the pitch of the voice. So we tried that. We tried to do like a sort of smart custom solver that would cast rays in multiple directions, checking for obstacles, able to change trajectory itself if needed, and spawning control ripples at each rays. And eventually, so that was a bit overkill, but it was interesting. And eventually, we ended up using a handful of SOP ripple solver stacked on top of each other and carefully keyframed to get the exactly the desired effect. So we did not use everything we developed, but we learned a lot trying things out, and that was for sure an interesting journey. The bad cymatics. So, well, the high-pitched voice of the Princess Disa was not so pleasing to everyone. And eventually, it awakes something deep down the darkness of Khazam-dûm. So the roar of the Balrog had to be identified visually without any doubt as something scary and dangerous. The bad cymatics, though. So one of our main reference was this awesome crocodile turbulence, crocodile spiky turbulence made with their bellow. I think that's how we say that. We tried to emulate the same behavior and see how we could animate that and control the frequency, the amplitude, and then make them move across the surface of the lake, like some sort of waves of sound, more and more intense as the roar were intensifying as well, echoing from deep down the cave and rushing toward the princess. So basically animated spreading solver, custom velocity fields, and a proper flip simulation with a bunch of post-simulation tweak to get every shot right. And that was it. So yeah, 3 big shots like this, and the last one, the camera was almost in the water, so heavy sim. But that was cool. And yeah, that's it for the 3 first chapters, so I think I was fast enough. Now let's talk about Gurdret. So Gurdret was the big shot, a 409 frame long shot with pretty much everything we can think of in terms of effects. So this is the final shot, final comp delivered. So let's have a look at it. Yes. So that was a big shot, a lot of everything. We did light bubbles, implosion bubble, like call it whatever you want. That was really the first kind of layer. Dynamic God rays, compression sphere, or repulsed haze, or whatever name you want to give it. I think he went through a few names as well during the production. We keep renaming it. Cloud ring, cloud disintegration, ground shockwave 1, because we did like a first one, and then flying debris, dynamic trees, a river, a mushroom explosion, and a supercell cloud. Shockwave 2, which was the frozen one, a frost effect, a reveal map, some icicles, some snow, mist, fog, etc., etc. So we knew we had to deal. We're going to have to deal with a massive environment, which would be composed of dozens of different elements, and we would have to make them FX compliant. So we had to stay organized and bring all the relevant parts of the environment in a way that it would stay manageable for us and as simple as possible to keep up to date. Every single time the environment was being modified, which was basically almost almost every week, so not every day, but very often. So when I say as simple as possible, simple is not really the term that describes best the environment for us. It would be probably more accurate to say the less painful possible. So yeah, we try to do that to keep it clean. And even once everything was imported and converted to FX compliant assets, we would still go an extra step and further optimize plenty of sub-elements. Sometime we're going into for each loops in order to reprocess some groups of geometry, turn them into VDB, then back to polygon, and so on, filling all the potential holes or gaps or overlapping faces, trying to get like a constant topology or this kind of jazz. And then everything was recached as a BGO using our Yard cache nodes. So we could publish them and provide them as a FX ready element to each FX artist working on the shot. So basically, only one artist had to do that painful part, and everyone else just had to version up their Yard cache to be sure to stay up to date. So we all have to start somewhere. That's the top left corner. We started with not much, just to put the first bricks in the wall. And that was really like a quick rough version of the ground shockwave, but that was just to sort of realize what type of simulation scale we would be dealing with. And also to have an overview of all the tech constraints that would come with that. Then we started to really put all the main layer in place to be able to tell the story. So first, implosion explosion, using like an underwater explosion as main reference. Shockwaves composed of 3 layers: ground, rings, and sphere. Some God rays for the anticipation of the explosion, of the implosion explosion, etc. The ring shockwave, or cloud ring, or whatever, was really something in the earlier version, really one of the major elements of the beginning of the shot. So we went through quite a few iterations, and even at some point we made like a direct reference to something that we all know from the first original trilogy, which is the Eye of Sauron, because that shot was supposed to be the death of Sauron. So for us, it was cool to do like a little reference. But eventually, the entire shockwave ring ID was completely removed of the shot. But it was cool to work on. So we made it clearing out the clouds in the sky, like a nuke explosion or a volcano eruption would do. So that was definitely a cool effect to work on. But it was removed, so better focus to the stuff that stayed. The first ground shockwave. So the main constraint with that shockwave was the distance it has to travel from the base of the tower to the camera, and obviously the timing of the event happening in the shot. We really had zero flexibility with that timing. It had to start at a specific frame and sync with the explosion at the tower, and it has to reach the camera at a very specific frame as well. So to cover that distance in such a short time, it has to travel pretty much at Mach 2. I'm kidding, kind of. I mean, it was not exactly Mach 2. I don't reckon the exact speed, but it was like a crazy high number. And so obviously, if you do a bit of FX, crazy fast emitter, on a crazy long distance, usually it comes with, stepping, substep issue, and all this kind of stuff you need to solve. So since that was like really the painful part of it, to try to make everything without any tech issue on that, and then we could focus on the artistic side. And since the creative design and art direction was constantly evolving during the making of the shot, we went through countless iteration. When I say countless, it's like I think there is like hundreds of versions of that shockwave. The first version where really we really wanted something very diffuse, very thin as well, and then eventually we moved progressively to something more like a nuke ground shockwave. So we wanted a lot of sharp detail, something pyroclastic and dense, but not too much again, because he had to dissipate fast enough so it would clear the frame quickly to allow us to see the other event happening behind. but not too fast, so it's still visually plausible. We ended up splitting the whole environment into many layers and run separate volumetric simulation for each part with different resolutions based on the camera distance. Essentially, we made a sort of massive cluster simulation using Axiom Solver in order to sim as fast as possible and make the most of our GPUs. Running that into a topnet through a wedge system, so we could cook the whole topnet and wait for all the simulation to be finished before to merge them all back together. And then we also added some flying particles, debris, branches, and whatnot to better sell the scale and the violence of that first shockwave. I'm not going too much into the post-production part. We normalized the density of each layer, fading out the density toward the camera to avoid full coverage and all this kind of stuff, camera frustum optimization and whatnot. But just so you know, one of the most painful was probably to export all these heavy VDB sequences, combine them all as much as possible, rename them, scale them up in size, and at the same time compensate accordingly the scalar field in order to give that to lighting to be rendered into another software. And that bit was really no fun. Once that first shockwave has passed down the camera, we would see the second big effect of the shot. So everything was going to get frozen. So the second blast, the second shockwave, the frozen one, it has to grow and cover the entire environment, turning everything into ice. And this effect was composed of many layers of volumetrics, particles, spreading solvers on the ground, generating masks. Plenty of layers. So everything obviously had to be meticulously art-directed, so we had to be able to control when each meter square of the environment was turned to frost, basically. The supervisor really wanted to be able to draw at which frame, which part of the environment was turning into ice, and he wanted to feel some large chunks snapping suddenly, while some other parts were more progressively covered. So something like very chaotic, but like an organized chaos, if you will. We needed to create a fully controllable animated map, and we named it the Frost Reveal Map. For that, we made a spread solver in a spread or infection solver based on a bunch of curves that were all animated, animated the curve on each curve, so we could control properly the path and the speed of the progression in every direction. And for each of those main curves was growing a sort of L system that would behave like an actual frost. We looked into actual frost time-lapse, mostly close-up, and tried to emulate that at a gigantic scale, trying to at least get the same feeling. And that frost was spreading, that spreading simulation was then turned into a mesh. So that's the top right screen. That was rendered, and essentially that was used as a mask in compositing to make the transition from the tundra environment render to the winter environment render. And obviously, the leading edge of the mesh was also used to drive other layers of FX. So this is how the setup for the Frost Reveal map looked in the end. So on the top right, you can see all the curves drawn by hand, and then if you follow the arrow of the dependency, it goes on the left side, which is where we fracture all the environment into large Voronoi chunks, and they all get activated by the curve animation, and that spawns the spread solver, which used the L system. And obviously, we treated the foreground separately to get more artistic control and flexibility. As I mentioned, the leading edge was used for other sims, such as this miniature version of the frosting effect. So we could see some nice crispy details of the environment being beaten by the frost and turned into ice. So this is mostly visible on the foreground part, but and we don't see it past a certain distance, but we run it on the whole environment, actually. And so, like for every films or series, the show was in a constant evolution in terms of artistic choice or directions, and Girdwet was no exception. We were working on all the different layers of FX for quite some time already and making progress on all fronts, addressing all the artistic notes that were given to us every day. And then suddenly the creative came up with a great new idea, like, hey, let's forget about the cloud ring, and now we want to see a giant supercell cloud above the tower, like a giant exploding, spinning, stormy supercell. Like, yeah, they came out with a crazy idea. So those were two of the main reference that we used. You had like plenty of supercell references, but those two ones were really our favorite one. For the shapes, the right one looks like a crown, kind of. So round crown, And again, everything had to happen in a specific timings to fit the rhythm of the events happening in the shot. So the concept art came with a few proposals, and they did this old school 2D animatic, which was great because we could get all the idea of how it would go, in terms of shapes and timing, and basically that becomes our new target to hit. And now we just needed to turn that into FX simulation. So easy peasy. So this was probably one of the most challenging effects we had to create for this shot. It was supposed to start from an explosion happening at the first blast, like a mini nuke, while sticking to the structure of the tower, rising quickly above it, and it needed to spread very quickly and very widely high in the sky to create that crown shape. And then it had to spin on itself at the end of the shot like a giant vortex. Easy. So from a technical point of view, this was made of multiple heavy volume simulation with strong dependency between each other, all constrained in different ways to force them to make the desired shapes and evolve in the correct timing. And all blending together in the end with some sort of post-simulation keyframe deformation on top of that to enhance the vortex effect. So this was quite heavy and very time-consuming and not so easy to iterate. And obviously, we had to do a lot of iteration. So the true difficulty of delivering that effect was to be able to handle the amounts of artistic changings being made from one week to another, basically. We threw at first that if we would match exactly the shapes of the concept, we would win. But the concept itself kept evolving while we were trying to make the effect. So yeah, that was like an endless battle. The shapes, the timing, yeah, lots of back and forth, and the artist working on that really had to brace himself and stay strong. And then when finally we thought we managed to get through all of it, and then to get it right, and everyone was happy, and then, why not changing the size of the tower? Let's make it thinner and much taller. And so, yeah, since we had quite a few layers of the simulation colliding against the tower, the final supercell cloud was at a certain altitude. So if you change the whole tower, well, stay strong. So, yeah, I'm not going to say that at the end, a big part of all of this was being covered by other layers because that would be mean. But yeah, that was partly covered by some the compression sphere. So the compression sphere, we had to revisit completely from the first version we did. And we ended up doing like a few layers of volume simulation mixed with some carefully animated noises, to get some area denser and some other less, evolving across the environment. And in the end, it was just a few different stimulations mixed together through some animated noise. We could keep the part that we liked the most from each simulation and make them all work together as one. And everything was optimized as much as possible, compressing everything that could be compressed, deleting every field or attribute that we didn't need it, and culling everything out of the camera frustum with some safety margin for potential needs of overscan later on, which was definitely used totally. So good thing we thought about it first. We also added some more subtle layers of Atmos, gentle ground fog at the very beginning that is all over the environment. It's very subtle in the final comp, but it's there, and it gets blown by the first shockwave. And then after the second one, there is like the opposite, like a cold ground mist that appear. In the end, we added some wispy clouds appearing on the mountain, getting blown by the wind. We added at the last minute. We added some more bigger dynamic clouds there and there to bring more atmosphere to the winter environment. And we had a bunch of scattered trees everywhere in the environment. I don't remember the exact number of trees, but lots of trees. And they were all simulated. So we had moving leaves, branches, and they all get affected by the different volume layers of shockwaves. They all get blasted by the first shockwave. Most of them lost all their leaves. They all get blown away, and then they all got frozen, and then they got covered in icicles, and some of them have their branch breaking and falling apart. So yeah, we went through a lot of iteration. The layout of the trees in the environment kept changing quite a few times. the timing of the shockwave as well, and every time the trees has to be reprocessed. And to be fair, in the end, you barely pay attention to most of them. They are so far away and they get covered by other layers of FX so quickly, but yeah, I swear, they have been given a lot of love. And this one was the hero tree, because it was really like a foreground, so the camera was passing pretty close. So we added more layers of snow and ice particles, and obviously it was simulated with higher resolution. And there you go, that's the first shockwave, the second shockwave, flying debris, snow particles, dynamic trees, all together. We are almost there, just a few more layers of FX, and we could complete the shot. So from the base of the tower and even beyond, to the very foreground, just below the camera, like just a few centimeters below the camera, a long river was flowing across the entire environment. That's cool. And it has to be blasted by the first shockwave, and eventually it has to turn into ice and make a frozen river. So yeah, again, divide and conquer. I split the river into manageable simulation with different resolution depending on the camera distance. And to create the river flow, I tried to stay mostly agnostic of the collision geometry to define the flow of the river. So I used my favorite method, which I started using years ago, that I kept improving every time I can, which is painting the river flow. So I could literally sculpt the look of the river like a drawer with a brush, and I could paint some swirly motion around and behind each rocks, or any motion really, make the water accelerate or slow down, turn left or right, settle in a corner. So that way I knew pretty much how my simulation was going to look before to even start simulating. And at the same time, I could reduce as much as possible the back and forth with the environment department, unlike if I was relying purely on the riverbed and the rocks to define the water flow. So that gives a lot of artistic control and saved a lot of time, and added some whitewater, a wet map system, and boom, the river setup is pretty much ready. And then I started refining everything to get close to the final look, fine-tuning the amount of whitewater, more or less foam, how long does it live before it dissipates, adding some underwater aeration bubbles. And once we were happy with that, I could reintroduce the two shockwave in the simulation. So the first shockwave was used as a velocity field to blast all the surface and make everything splash around. I had to keyframe the substep of the flip solver and crank them up like crazy for a few frames. I think I went to 15 substep or something like that, in order to be able to pick up the veil field of the first shockwave that was passing by at Mach 2. And so it has enough subframe to kick in the simulation. And the second shockwave used this. So I used the second shockwave and turned it into a VDB mask, kind of basically, in order to freeze all the water and remove the foam and everything that goes into that VDB mask, get into a group that I call frozen, and then I make it stop moving and I lose all the velocity after a couple of frames. So yeah, it's like 3 frames after it gets in the group, just stop moving, lose all the velocity, store that data of being called frozen, and then I can use that later on. So once the water is frozen, it needs to become thick ice with a crack running along the middle of the river. We had a few concept arts of the frozen river with that long cracks running right in the middle, and that's really something we wanted to keep. So I made like a simple ice crack deformer system, which really was just a simple point VOP with a handful of Voronoi mixed together, and apply that post-simulation to deform the mesh with a bit of animated VDB reshape, to delete the ice when it was turning into ice, like it's dilating. So that was it. And also I added obviously some extra splashes against the foreground rock to enhance the action when the camera is passing by, and merge that back into the whole simulation. So what time is it? I'm good. This is a quick run into the whole setup. So first, import all the environment and resplit it into smaller bits. Turn that back again. Really try to optimize everything to just keep what I needed into the riverbed. That's importing all the VDB layer for the first shockwave. Clip them all to keep them all only in the river. This is the second shockwave turned into a mask. So this is all the emitter to prepare the riverbeds, my constant emitter for the pre-roll, and this is like redoing a bit of extra work on the collision, adding some kill zone, some zone to damp the velocity toward the river banks. This bit is where I'm drawing with the curves all my river flow, and I turn that basically into a velocity field using a simple, like something very, very simple. It's just to spend a bit of time drawing all your curves to get something that looks cool. And then this is the flip solver. So I use the SOP flip approach, and I just customized hell out of it, made like a controller so I could control everything from there and not having to dive into the solver every time. With, as you can see, a lot of features, so I could add extra emitter if I needed to, or add a veil field or whatever you want, or VDB to be used as mask, or like here in that case with that little ramp was for the damping toward the river banks or the bottom of the river. And then we're gonna go quickly inside the .NET just to you see what I did. So here in the first subnet. So that's all the airfield system that I tried with a switch to be able to change between each method. This is to advect with the two shockwave, and this is when everything goes into the frozen mask. Basically, just remove, hold the position where it is and remove the velocity. And that's it. Then a bit of post simulation optimization, then meshing everything out with a lot of filtering, then caching that out, and then creating the ice mask so I could run my crack deformer on top of that with a bit of control, with simple ramps based on the bounding box, so I could get my cracks running pretty much in the center. Whitewater was really like a classic whitewater solver with a bit of customized nodes just to help everything to clump together or to make the bubble move more like I wanted. And then killing everything when I tried to use the frozen effect at first, but it was a bit overkill, and for what we were seeing. Eventually, I ended up with simple pop kill to just kill everything that was going into the frozen mask, and that was it. Some wet map system, very simple, nothing really crazy here. Just like very, very optimized, so I could run that on the massive environment without to break too much of sweat. Then I split that into different layers, mesh them, and export them all with different type of useful parameter attributes. Sorry, for the lighting. I did an extra foam, to get more foamy shapes on top of the river. So that was really like just a pop solver with a bit of advection. And then same goes for the midground and the background, just changing the resolution, like make the particle separation a bit bigger. And then the far background was really just a simple ocean spectrum. And that was it. And this is the final flip simulation that got into the shot. And as you can see, that was quite a bit of work, and I really wanted to share that with you because that's the only opportunity to see that. Because in the end, in the final shot, when you combine that with every other element, well, again, you don't see much of it. So this is, sorry. That last bit is, I just wanted to show you that. So this scene, this was like a master render scene where I gather all the different layers of FX all together into one big scene. And ironically, I called it the FX Uber render scene, which is, that was the name. That was like, we render everything with Mantra at this time for creative approval, before to release everything to lighting and to be rendered into another software. So I kept this entire scene up to date to be able to make an assembly of all the FX layer with the latest and greatest version, and kept presenting that for internal review until every single element of our department was approved final. And then it was re-rendered for final in 4K with a lot of sampling and all the proper lighting of the shot in another 3D software by the lighting artist. But you can see I had mercy on you because I skipped all the sub-little layer of each FX layer. For each, you can see there is actually like a 20 sub-layer for each stuff. And I did not have like a 2-hour-long presentation, so I had to skip all of this. You can thank me, Chris. And finally, let's watch again the final version of the shot. and see all these different layers of effects made all separately and with creative notes on each of them separately, independently of the rest. Eventually, they are all nicely working together as one. So I'd just like to take just a last minute to say thanks to some special people. So the FX team, thanks for all the great teamwork. Adrien, Bertrand, Nicolas, Sébastien, Kevin, and Louis. They went through a lot. The Supervision team, thanks for your creative visions, for your technical guidance, and for your wisdom and kindness. So Laurence, Emeric, Louis, and Julien. And the prod team, kudos to the girls. Big up, thanks for being so patient with us, and thanks for being so well organized and for helping us to stay focused on our art, I would say. And that will be it for today. So thank you very much.
I am a huge fan of the work of the Yard. Great stuff. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is about voxel size, especially about smoke simulation coming towards the camera. Obviously, you want the simulation time to be quick, so you have to have it low res, but also you need the detail in the front when the smoke gets to the camera. And since I've dealt with it myself on several shots, my question is, how did you go about that? How did you balance the voxel size, the simulation time, and the detail? And also, as a bonus question, do you have a sort of a guideline, a voxel to pixel ratio that you want to hit, or do you just wing it?
Well, so I don't have the numbers in my head right now, but if I remember well, I think for the second shockwave, so the frozen one, the smoke that is on the rocks, on the two rocks on the foreground, they were probably the highest resolution. I think it was something around 0.025, something like that, voxel size, but I'm not 100% sure. Something around this. But yeah, the idea was as you divide your simulation as much as possible, so you can, if you need to go very high, or very low rather, into voxel size, so very high resolution, you need to do that in the smallest chunks possible. And what is just behind, because it's going to be covered very quickly by something else, you really don't need much resolution on that, and the one behind even less and less. So really, in the end, there is just like maybe 3 or 4 layers that really needed super high resolution, and even if those simulations were taking way longer than the other one, it was worth the price, so you could spend a bit of time on that. I don't have, that's an interesting question, I don't have a ratio of pixel to voxel size ratio. That would be smart, but I'm not as smart of that. I'm more like artistic driven than purely technical on that point of view. So it's more like eyeballed. As long as it looks nice and we don't perceive the voxel, that's good enough. I mean, sort of. You always try to push it as much as possible. The idea is also you want to see the detail that you are making in the simulation, and not seeing that being covered by voxels. So yeah, it's really trying to find the right balance. So it's high enough, high resolution enough, so it looks great in the picture, but you can still run it basically without going to dozens of hours of simulation. Which, I used to do that years ago when I was still working with Spyro. But since I moved to Axiom for all the volumetric simulation, if any simulation goes above 30 minutes, I just stop it, and I know that I did something wrong, and I go back to my source to see what I can optimize in the simulation. If I had to split it to make 2 instead of 1, then I will do that. Maybe the left rocks is just 1 simulation, the right rock is just 1. Maybe I can even split the rocks in 2 or maybe into 4 until I got the resolution I really need. And usually, on this type of simulation at least, when it's like fast-moving smoke or fire or fast-moving volume, basically, you don't see it doesn't need to be an actual cluster simulation with data, crossing each domains. Each simulation is totally individual, and that's good like this, because in the end, when everything is moving, you don't see the separation between each. And that would not work on something that moves more slowly, I would say. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Even your answers are so good. Excellent. Good work, Fabian. Thanks for sharing that information. Awesome presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.